As the old saying goes, opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, and they all stink. And speaking of assholes, Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States. Just let that sink in for a moment. Wow. This past Tuesday, election night, was a bit of a surprising night for sure. While there was always the possibility or the chance that it could happen, it's still, I think, surprising to Trump opponents and Trump supporters alike that it actually did happen, that Donald Trump will be residing in the Oval Office. He will be the next president of the United States. Now, that is the reality. I can talk about opinions and thoughts on that till I'm blue in the face. But that's not what I really wanted to talk about here. Because with what happened on Tuesday, and frankly the path leading up to actual election day itself on Tuesday, November 8th, I heard a lot of different opinions about why Hillary Clinton would win, why Donald Trump would lose, blah, blah, blah. And then once election night happened and the results and the reality started to sink in, I started to hear reasons why Donald Trump won and why Hillary Clinton lost. And, some reasons that were given were somewhat valid, and some of them were just an attempt by the media to set narratives that just weren't backed by the facts. They weren't backed by the math, the evidence, the vote. And they didn't necessarily paint an accurate picture. So what I wanted to do is based off of how I see it. And again, you could say it's my opinion, and opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, and my stinks just as like everybody else's does. I think there are some real reasons you can point to as to why Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. And what I set out to do in this video is give you the 10 biggest reasons why Donald Trump won. And I'll go in reverse order from 10 to 1. And hopefully by the time we get to the end of this video, I will have made a good case as for these being the reasons why he actually did win. And they're not necessarily all what the media is talking about. So let's get started. Number 10, the history of the incumbent party winning a third term. Since the beginning of the 20th century, only 4 times has the incumbent party that's had a candidate in the office for 8 years been able to win a third term. You're going back to William Taft in the election of 1908, FDR with the election in 1940 and 1944, where he was the candidate that had been in the office the previous 8 years, and that was also in wartime situations. Then you've got Harry S. Truman in 1948 beating Thomas Dewey, and then you've got George H.W. Bush in 1988 defeating Michael Dukakis on the heels of the era of Reagan. That's 4 times where it was successful. On the flip side, 6 times where it weren't successful. James Cox in 1920, Adlai Stevenson in 1952, Richard Nixon in 1960, Hubert Humphrey in 1968, Al Gore in 2000, John McCain in 2008. So you've had more precedent for the incumbent party that's held the White House the previous 8 years losing than winning. And it's just really hard to do because 8 years is a long period of time. A lot of things can go wrong. And frankly, after a period of time, Americans get bored and they want change and they like something different. So from the very jump, Hillary Clinton, besides all the stuff involving Hillary Clinton, which we'll get to later, she was facing a bit of an uphill battle. She really was. Not like Obama's presidency would sink her like Bush's did to McCain in 2008, because where Bush's approval ratings were in the 30s, Obama's approval rating sits somewhere on average in the 49-50 to 54-55% range. So from the beginning, Hillary Clinton was sitting at a much more advantageous position, but in this constant cycle of people wanting change and resenting the establishment, it's not necessarily a good formula for success. Number 9, you look at the increased support for third-party candidates like Gary Johnson and Jill Stein and what have you. Now, some people will point to this as being the primary reason, and this most certainly is not the primary reason, because at the end of the day, if Hillary Clinton is a better candidate and or runs a better, more effective campaign, the third party support doesn't matter, and she's still the president of the United States. You could see where Gary Johnson had some impact in the race, in particular in the states that would have mattered most to Hillary in this election, which would have been Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But you can't just sit there and say every single person that voted for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein would be people that automatically vote for Hillary Clinton, because that's not the case too. I know I talked to plenty of people that were Republicans that didn't vote for Donald Trump, just like I spoke to many Democrats that didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. So it's hard to really put a number on it, but potentially as you create more options and realistic options being available, fewer people gravitated towards the major party candidates. So you could point to that having an effect on Hillary Clinton. How much? Would it have made a difference if Johnson didn't get the same support that he got this time? I don't know. But I think it is a reason. But a more important reason, number 8, would be decreased turnout in urban areas in a couple of the Rust Belt states that ultimately Hillary Clinton lost. You look at the state of Wisconsin and look particularly where Milwaukee is, Milwaukee County. There were 59,000 fewer voters, close to 60,000 fewer voters in 2016 as opposed to 2012. And you're talking about a Milwaukee County that would swing huge for Hillary Clinton, close to a 70% tick. She lost the state by a little over 25,000 votes. I believe it was 27,000 votes. So think about the ratio. You're talking about 7 out of every 10 voters approximately in that county supporting her, and there were about 60,000 fewer voters there. And that lack of turnout, maybe you go to the counties right by Milwaukee, in Racine and Kenosha, maybe the fact that she didn't perform very well, there was a representation of that lack of urban turnout there. If she gets better turnout in that county, and maybe as a consequence a little bit better turnout for herself in Racine and Kenosha counties in Wisconsin, there in the southeast corner of the state, she probably wins Wisconsin. That lack of turnout in Milwaukee County and its immediate area really harpooned her campaign, submarined her campaign. For all the talk you're going to hear about the white working class voters and rural suburban voters breaking for Trump, at the end of the day, if she got better turnout of Milwaukee County, it might not have mattered. And it most certainly wouldn't have mattered in Michigan. When you look at Wayne County, where Detroit is, there were 38,000 fewer voters than 2012. 38,000. Again, a district you're talking about that is going to break more than 2/3 for Hillary. She lost the state by about 12,000 votes. 12,000 the way it sits now. So 38,000 fewer voters and a 12,000 vote loss. You can do the math. 2 out of every 3 voters, if she got the same amount of turnout that Barack did in 2012, she probably wins Michigan too. Now, it still doesn't account for potentially losing Pennsylvania, but in Michigan and in Wisconsin, I can point specifically to Wayne County and Milwaukee County specifically and say those 2 counties and the lack of turnout there cost Hillary Clinton those 2 states. A lot of times it comes down to the numbers, and the numbers weren't very good for her there. And now we kind of get to where Hillary Clinton really did a lot of damage to herself. We talked before about the Obama coalition, and she really underperformed with the Obama coalition. Number 7, we get to lower black/African American support for Hillary Clinton. Where you're talking about Obama in 2008, 2012 getting 93, 94, 95% or so of the black vote, and the black vote being about 13% of the overall electorate. That's a huge sweeping number. Hillary still won it with a huge sweeping number, but instead of getting 93 to 95%, she's getting 88%. So she's losing some of the huge, massive advantage that the Obama coalition had built up with the black African American voters. So obviously that plays a role, just like number 6. And what was really surprising to me, there was a lower Hispanic Latino support for Hillary Clinton. Obama in 2012 got 71% of the Hispanic vote. 71% of the Hispanic Latino vote. Romney only got 27% of the Hispanic Latino vote. 4 years later, Hillary took that 71% down to 65%. Hispanic Latino voters went from being about 10% of the electorate to 11% of the electorate. So she got a smaller portion of a slightly larger portion of the electorate. And on top of that, Hispanic Latino voters win about 29% for Trump. Of all the confounding, what the fuck, voting against your own self-interest type of things that could possibly happen in this election, not only did Hillary Clinton get fewer voters from Hispanic and Latino communities, but Trump got more than Romney did 4 years earlier. Again, talking all this shit about white working class voters and voters in the suburbs and the rural areas. If she does better with the black voters and Hispanic Latino voters, she may very well still win this election any damn ways. And then number 5, talking about an even larger overall portion of the voting base. She didn't get nearly the same amount of support from the under 30 crowd, the so-called millennials or whatever the hell label you want to put on them. Obama got about 60% of that group in 2012. Hillary Clinton got 55%. Now, losing some of the support in any one of these demographics is not necessarily a guarantee as to why Hillary Clinton lost. But when you look at lower turnout and support from black voters than 4 years ago for Obama, lower support for Hillary among Hispanics with slightly increased turnout in 2016, on top of Donald Trump getting more support from that group, and then the reduction in support amongst the under 30 crowd, you really start to get an idea of the narratives you've been spun by the media and the things you've been told by the media about what really made a difference in this election aren't really painting a true, accurate, and complete picture. Well, there's more. Number 4, why did Donald Trump win this election? The media. For all the conservatives that wanted to sit there and the Republicans that wanted to sit there and whine and piss and bitch and moan about the liberal media bias and the Hillary Clinton bias, at the end of the day, they were all full of shit. Not only was there a huge conservative media bias towards Donald Trump, at the end of the day, Donald Trump proved the old axiom once and for all that any press is good press. The liberal media had every bit the bias in favor of Donald Trump for different reasons, mind you, mainly sensationalism and ratings, as the conservative media did. Liberal, conservative, moderate media, Donald Trump was front and center every day for over a year. He ran one of the most effective campaigns ever in terms of name and message recognition that anybody has ever run in the history of this country. All while spending a fraction of what other candidates have had to do to get a much lower amount of name and face and message recognition. Not only did he already have a natural advantage built in because of who he was and what he had done throughout his career and the high media profile he's kept for the past 30 plus years of his public life, now you get into an election cycle where it's 24/7 Donald Trump coverage all the time. Sometimes it's good, a lot of times it's not. But every time that it's not, it's a chance to use that to rally your supporters. And it's another chance to potentially reach across the aisle, reach over to the other side and get some of those people where they eventually start to resent the negative press that Donald Trump gets. Sometimes bad press can be the best press of all because you can use it as a unifying piece. So for all this talk about liberal media bias and all this other bullshit, it's bullshit. Donald Trump benefited tremendously from the media. All sides in their bias. And you have to be a fool not to see it. Number 3, I really give Donald Trump and his campaign a tremendous amount of credit because you had a lot of people, myself included, that thought his decision to really try and target the states in the Midwest and in the Rust Belt being foolish. Now, I talked about it before, that the only real path that a Donald Trump had was to break into the Midwest, break into the Rust Belt, and flip several of those states. It was the only way the GOP could really grow their electoral map and make their path to 270 feasible again. But as the election wore on and on and on, I just didn't really see where this message was going to win over enough of the Midwest and Rust Belt states. Sure, I knew he was going to win Iowa. I knew he was going to win Ohio. But that was as much Hillary Clinton not being a favored candidate there and Hillary Clinton and her campaign making a conscientious decision early on that they were going to concede those states in a way. But when you start talking about Donald Trump not only flipped Iowa and Ohio red, two states that had voted for Obama in 2008, in 2012, but she had Pennsylvania flipped on her by Trump. Trump flipped Michigan, he flipped Wisconsin. And going into those states where Hillary Clinton, especially in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, just didn't. He went there and he went there. And as the campaign reached its last few weeks, Donald Trump and his team went to these places and in races that weren't supposed to be races and made them races and ultimately came out the better for it. It was a genius move by that campaign and by that candidate. You have to give credit where credit is due. Number two, when we talk about the good things that Donald Trump did in his campaign in terms of being smart enough to understand a path to 270 that carved through the Midwest and through the Rust Belt, we also have to give the credit where the credit is also due on the flip side. And that is the number two reason Donald Trump won his presidential race is because of Hillary Clinton. In a cycle where a lot of people wanted to talk about change and having somebody from the outside and being tired of the corruption in the games of Washington, Hillary Clinton is the representation of establishment evil on so many different levels. When you're Donald Trump, yeah, you're rich, but you take a look at Hillary Clinton and you see that she's in the bed with the big banks and the Wall Street and all this other crap. You know, where Donald Trump is a liar and he has an integrity problem. He ran against a candidate who had every bit, if not more so, of the integrity problem. And on top of that, it was almost as every bit inherently unlikable as Donald Trump. That was Hillary Clinton. But at the end of the day, we talk about the representation of establishment evil, and we talk about how inherently unlikable Hillary Clinton is, and deservedly so. It comes down to the fact that Hillary Clinton and her team ran one of the most ridiculously sloppy and arrogant and ridiculous campaigns for president that I have ever fucking seen. Here's a team that was trying to push the electoral map to 370 before they ensured their path to 270. I understand in a way why they wanted to pursue the Arizonas and the Georgias and the North Carolinas and the Floridas. I mean, they were states that if things go right could potentially be in play. And North Carolina was in play. Florida was most certainly in play. I mean, she performed better in Arizona and Georgia than Donald Trump did, than Barack Obama did in 2012. But to sit there and not pay attention to Michigan until very late in the game, to not pay attention to Wisconsin at all, once you had your primary race there against Bernie Sanders, you never visited Wisconsin once? And people don't even talk about the fact, when we talk about Midwest and Rust Belt states, the fact that she barely won Minnesota, a state that broke double digits for Barack Obama before. She won by like 1.5%. I mean, what a sloppy and arrogant campaign she ran. It was this assumption that she didn't need to worry about Wisconsin or Michigan because she had those in the bag. No, bitch, you didn't. I mean, just a horribly run campaign with, frankly, a terrible candidate. Let's not sugarcoat it. Donald Trump is a buffoon, and Donald Trump was a terrible candidate. The ironic thing is, he is the perfect representation of many things that are the modern-day GOP, even though the modern-day GOP tries to distance themselves from who they actually are. At least Donald Trump has the courage to be upfront about what and who he is. He doesn't try to hide from it and, deceitfully mask it like the GOP does, like modern-day Republicans do. But Jesus Christ, as unlikable as he was, how is Hillary Clinton any more likable? And the numbers bear that out. And again, everybody's going to talk about the white voters. Fuck the white voters for a second. She got lower support among blacks. Not only did she get lower support from the Hispanic and Latino voters, Trump got more. You'd think the one group that was going to break in record numbers for the Democratic candidate didn't. They broke more for Trump than they did for Romney. And she got lower support among voters under 30. She underperformed as well versus Barack in both rural and urban America. I mean, Jesus Christ, it takes a historically crappy candidate to pull that off. Because again, even though the history wasn't necessarily great of running as part of the incumbent party that's been in the White House the previous 8 years, Obama had just enough appeal and just enough favorability to where it should have made a difference for Hillary Clinton. And because she was so bad and her campaign was so badly botched and mishandled, they ate away at that advantage and ultimately lost the election. I mean, so much of this has to do with Hillary Clinton. You're probably surprised that I don't have her at number one. Because at the end of the day, Hillary Clinton is not the number one reason that Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States. He is not. She is not. You know, we could talk about the history of the incumbent party trying to get a third term and the third party candidates and decreased urban turnout in some of the Rust Belt states. Lower support amongst the Obama coalition from 2008 and 2012 this go around. We could talk about the media's bias for Donald Trump on all sides and how they helped make this possible. We could talk about the genius of Trump and his campaign team running effective campaigns in the Rust Belt and in the Midwestern states. We could blame Hillary Clinton, but the number one reason that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States is the Electoral College. I find it ridiculous that I've seen some conservative types talk about how Donald Trump has this mandate. Mandate my ass. The dude didn't even get 50% of the popular vote. Only in Republican politics could somebody have a mandate when they didn't even get the support of half of the people. I mean, that's ridiculous. Does that make any sense to anybody? No. On top of that, Donald Trump lost the popular vote. Let me repeat that. Lost the popular vote. This is the second time in 16 years, going back to 2000 with Al Gore winning the popular vote against George W. Bush, where the candidate who won the popular vote ended up losing the White House. If you ran the presidential race like you do pretty much every other election in this country, talking about local races for aldermen and city council members, the mayor, your local state senators and representatives, your governors, your U.S. House members, your U.S. senators. If you ran the presidential election like any of those other races, for all the other bullshit, up to and including how horrible Hillary Clinton was as a candidate, Donald Trump would have lost. And Hillary Clinton would be the next president of the United States. And this is not opinion, hyperbole, spin, bias. This is freaking fact. Donald Trump, the ironic thing is, for a guy 4 years ago that bitched about the Electoral College and talked about how flawed it was and used that as a prop example of the system being rigged, is now benefiting from that so-called rigged system, which it kind of is to a degree, although it's hard to come up with any other real better way to do it other than just doing it strictly most popular vote wins. He has benefited from the system that he bitched about. And the only reason he is president, or going to be president, is because of that bullshit Electoral College system. He just happened to win more states that mattered. Because he didn't win the popular vote. He didn't even get 50% of the popular vote. If he did it like some states do when they have races for congressmen, like House of Representatives or senators, like Louisiana, I think, does it, where if they have a bunch of candidates and nobody gets 50% or more, they have a runoff and a redo with the top two people. If we ran it like this type of race, we would have to have a runoff where the only two options to vote for would be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. So people could talk about idiotic things like this being a white lash for 8 years of Obama, Or talk about how the white working class was dismissed by Democrats and they came screaming over to the Republicans. And even if you want to believe all that bullshit is true, which in no way is actually an indication of the entire big picture of what the fuck happened in this election, if Donald Trump had to run this race to win the popular vote to be president, he wouldn't be the president. And at the end of the day, in spite of all this other shit, if it wasn't for the Electoral College, he wouldn't be the next president of the United States. Hillary Clinton would. Just think about that. It's unbelievable. So when you hear people in the media talking about all this other shit, at the end of the day, if they don't tell you the number one reason that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States is because of the Electoral College, you should immediately dismiss them because they don't know what the fuck they are talking about. Donald Trump won the race to 270. That's why he's the next president. If the presidential race was structured like any other electoral race that we pretty much have in this country, he wouldn't be. It's that simple.